Agentic AI has made building unfair. You can sit in VS Code with Claude and build a working system in 35 minutes. It's self-healing, adaptive, and the demo looks like witchcraft. But here's the problem. What you can demo in 35 minutes is not what you can ship to a client in production. Build once, run forever? Lies. And self-modifying code in production? Nope. So the real question is, you built the perfect workflow, the client loves it. But now what? How do you sell a black box to people when you don't even know what it does? Let's find out. Agentic is the future of automation. Everyone is saying that kind of thing on social media at the moment, and I think there's some truth behind it, but also not really. Some of these things I've said myself, but there is context that I think now I need to share to make it far more relevant, because I think when people read this stuff, they think it's like this apply to every kind of thing, but that's not the case, because if you go and do that, you're going to end up shooting yourself in the foot as an AI automation expert or consultant, whatever it is that you're doing in the space at the moment. So some of the things going around are natural language building, self-healing workflows, which are amazing, build once, run forever, which I would never have said. And then the fourth one is no more drag and drop, which is kind of going to be true definitely in the future. But as you'll see for now, they're true but not true. So myth number one is that self-healing is the future. And it might be, but definitely not yet, because you have to look at it from the perspective of once something is in production, the last thing that you want is unpredictable behavior, because unpredictable behavior equals sad face. Imagine you built a lead gen tool for your customers, and as they get it in the environment, the agent thinks that it needs to self-heal and it ends up firing all of the employees. That would be something we don't want to happen, something self-healing. But in development, that kind of thing doesn't really matter. So if you're a one-person business, or if you're like me, where I just want the outcome as fast as possible, I don't really care, because I'm technical, so I understand kind of what I'm doing. I understand to some degree what the scripts are doing. And also I understand the consequences of what I'm doing. So again, I don't care. But if you're trying to sell this to your customers, we need the exact determinism out of this system. Otherwise, it can lead to massive problems. Clients aren't going to approve things that decide for them. They want to be able to make sure that this system is predictable. And that brings us on to myth number two, which is build once and run forever. And this has another problem, which actually attaches to the first problem as well. So the reality is that your APIs are going to fail, programs change, authentication expires, programs can even completely disappear because it turns out that they're no longer legal. Think about Appify, everyone was scraping leads one way, and then they pulled that Apollo scraper away and it broke a ton of workflows. So stuff like that can always happen. And if you have a system that is self-healing, sure, it would go and realize, hey, it no longer works. I found this in the forum. That was a fix to this, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. It could do that. But imagine it did in production. You would have no idea what it's doing, and there's no way your client would want it to do that, because it could be writing Python scripts that do X, Y, Z, but also ABC, and we might not want that. There could be PII that goes into that, and a whole bunch of other problems. So the idea of building something once and having it run forever is just not possible, because you eliminate that self-healing factor. And the other part of this is that a lot of people aren't baking monitoring in. They have no alerts, which means they're having silent failures. So they don't even know if they've built this once and it is actually failing. So the correct way to look at this thing is to say build once and monitor forever. Just like traditional software, it really doesn't matter what you're doing. You need to understand what is going on the back end. And we'll soon get into that. And then myth number three, natural language replaces the hard parts. That's not true either. The reality is that natural language reduces the friction for us getting our initial build done. So we get the speed to product a lot faster, but that doesn't mean that it's the final product. Shipping or delivering is a very different thing. You still need to have reliability in your system. You need to have the ability to audit whatever is happening in your app. You need to make sure that you have ownership behind it, and you need to have the observability like I just mentioned above. So despite the fact that we can now talk to these systems without even having to type or even have to drag and drop things anymore and have it build it for us, we still need to ensure that whatever we're delivering follows these four principles. And this brings us neatly into our first anchor. So Agentic solves the build speed. There's no doubt about that. It's the fastest way to build a prototype at the moment. But delivery is still going to be the real work. You can prototype something in 2 to 3 hours for bigger builds, but some stuff can be done in literal minutes. So that means that the speed to product is the most important thing right now. When you're trying to showcase an MVP, Agentic is the way to go. If you're still clicking things in n8n to show someone what an end product can look like, I think that's a waste of time for the most part, because whatever you build with Agentic, you can easily just reverse engineer with n8n, if that's the path that you wanted to take. But I think for the most part, people getting in front of an audience to sell something, you really need that speed, which is why you see so many GTM experts everywhere, because everyone knows with AI, speed to market is the most important thing, followed by building a cult and a whole bunch of other things, but that's for another video. The point is that demos are cheap now. And the people that will really make a lot of money from Agentic are the ones who can separate all of this hype and the pretty stuff from actually understanding how to deliver something with fidelity to a customer. And you do that by understanding that what you built in 2 hours is not the final product. It's just not. It doesn't matter what anyone says, how well it runs on their laptop and stuff like that. That is not production ready for mid-market and especially not enterprise. But you've got to understand you need something that is safe, you need something that is reliable, and you need something that is consistent. If you remember that scene from Westworld where they ask, what are you testing for? And they say fidelity. And it's the same thing here. You're looking at this thing's going to do the same thing every single time, but not just from a deterministic function, from the point of view of it's not going to give random errors. And if it does give random errors, we're going to know about them because of the observability that we baked in. So if we come on down here and we look at it from the perspective of determinism, which is pretty much what n8n does. You have that little canvas of the blocks. It does this, then this, then this, then this. We can easily do that with Agentic. You use Python scripts, you build your tools out with your employees. In fact, let me just show you. So if we come into here, there's a bit of mess in here because I've been building so much stuff. If you have a look at all of my tools down here, you'll see that these things are essentially, you can think of them as a node in n8n, a specific task that is going to get completed within that block. This is just in Python script format. So this thing over here is an Apollo API client, and it's going to go and it's going to interact with the API and do whatever the hell it is that I want it to do. I don't really have an idea what this is doing. I can kind of read Python at a super high level to understand it. But realistically, I don't know that this thing is, one, doing what it should be doing, two, if it's doing it in the most secure way, and three, if it's doing it in a way that actually makes sense as opposed to just exposing it to a whole bunch of other errors further downstream. So even if you make it deterministic with these tools, you're still not as protected as you think you are. So hardening fixes the behavior, but it doesn't solve the ownership problem. Yes, you can make it deterministic. You can add guardrails, you can whitelist things, you can have strict schemas, you can have validation, you can do your testing, you can do your evals, and you can make sure that this thing runs amazingly. But, and it's a very big but because it doesn't solve the biggest problem, can you review it? If you're selling trust to someone, which is essentially what you're doing every time you're trying to convince them to buy from you, they cannot trust you if you are not a developer. How could you possibly go to someone and say, cool, so I built this agentic workflow, and they're like, oh, okay, how does it work? You're not gonna, I don't know, but it does amazing results. I just press this button, I speak to it, and it builds me a lead gen system. And that's essentially what people are doing on YouTube, is they're vibing this stuff, which is amazing to build, especially for your own use. But unless you can review it, you cannot legitimately sell this thing. There's obviously a way around that I'll get into very soon. But you need to understand these questions to attach to the product that you're about to sell to a client. So can you review it? Can the client maintain it? That's the second thing that you need to ask, because if they don't have the talent on their team to look after this product you're about to sell them, that creates another problem of, do they think this is going to run by itself forever? Or do they think that it's easy to fix? Or do they think that you're going to come and do it for them? And then finally, who fixes it after we go live? Because it's not like you're going to build this and nothing's ever going to go wrong. It's never going to need updates because things are never going to change. So these three questions that we have on the right-hand side here are super important. And they're going to be the anchor that we use when we're trying to choose a business model to sell whatever it is that we're trying to sell with Agentic. So well done, you made it this far. Now we're going to get into the selling framework. And this is how I see things being sold for Agentic at the moment because of the problems that we just discussed in the first half of this video. So how do Vipers sell Agentic to businesses? And it's not by selling Agentic. You don't just want to slap the word Agentic onto whatever it is that you're doing, because at this point you're not. You're pretty much selling real software, or maybe even a SaaS, and you're shipping it with a delivery standard and an ownership plan. And so the first thing that you need to do is decide what business model you want. So I've created an entire video on this. You can check it out on the screen now. But for the most part, what this means is that whenever you're going into business, you want to understand what kind of business that you're in so that you don't ask the questions, who hosts this, who maintains that, who takes care of this? Those aren't the questions that you want to be asking because they stem from someone who doesn't understand their business model. If you understand you're either going to sell products or a SaaS, or you're going to do a managed service, which could include that SaaS, or you could choose a hybrid model where you sell the product and offer a retainer. But those three things are going to help you define what you're selling to people, but it's also going to make your life less complicated because you're going to understand the scoped rules within these lanes in which you're playing. So by picking the commercial model first, it makes your life a lot simpler and it makes the customer have a much easier way in understanding what you can offer them. So for instance, if you're going down the product delivery route, what you would do is you would build an amazing product. You might hand it over to someone on their team, offer them a week of training and say, here, cool, this is the product that we built you. This is how it works. This is the troubleshooting guide. Thanks very much. Goodbye. Now, obviously, you would have to understand a few things when you're speaking to them initially, like, do they have the technical capability for that? For instance, if it was just an n8n build, the technical capability behind handing that over is a lot easier because most people who aren't even that technical can understand to some degree how end-to-end works, and you can easily train them to use a system with a specific use case to use that system and maintain it and things like that. But then if you went down the managed service route, you would obviously be responsible for everything. So they would come to you if there's a problem. If their system went down, they would obviously come to you, and you would probably get into a bit of trouble for breaking your SLA that you set. But for the most part, this is probably the most stressful one, to have a managed service, because again, there is that uptime expectation, there's a delivery expectation that far outweighs that of the product delivery method. But my favorite has always been a hybrid method. So if I'm building something, or if I'm going to a client to offer them something, I'm always going to offer them the product delivery, bake in the training and all that stuff. But the best thing to do is to have a retainer model attached to that, so that I have recurring revenue over a period of months or whatever. And that way I can come in, I can do the maintenance, I can do the updates, I can do any new training. And while I'm doing that, I can figure out any new problems, which means there are new solutions I can create and more money for me to ultimately make. I prefer to stay away from a managed service because I don't want the hassle of people constantly coming to me and this constant ringing in my ears, and anxiety mosquitoes are not for me. But equally, if you're just doing a product delivery, you kind of lose out on that sweet little retainer. So hopefully you can see just by this quick overview why it's so important to start here, because you're asking fundamental questions that a business needs to understand, and sometimes they don't think about it. If you try and sell Agentic and they've heard that this thing is self-healing and amazing and all of the other buzzwords that come along with it, and you don't mention who's going to look after this once we take over, they will assume that this product is never going to break. And then when it breaks, they're going to come to you and they're going to come with their pitchforks and fire and take your business down. So it really protects your reputation, your brand, and you're going to get a lot more out of your client if you come across showing them the model of how you work and what they can get from you. Then secondly, for selling Agentic, you need to think about the packaging layer. So Agentic is the build speed. Like I already said, this is the fastest way to build something. It's the fastest way to MVP. But packaging is what makes it viable, because you cannot ship something that you have built on your laptop and just throw it on a client's site. Packaging answers these questions, like the scope boundary. What can it do and what can't it do? You need to make sure that your clients understand that very clearly, so that you don't think you're selling them the elixir of life. What is the permissions boundary? So what can it access? Those kinds of things need to be baked in there so that it's not doing things that it shouldn't be doing once it slowly starts to get into production. But if no one ever defines what those things are or understands what the permission boundaries are, you're never going to know to bake that in. The data boundary. So that's pretty self-explanatory. There's data privacy. You've got to think about different regions and their laws, like GDPR in America. I'm sure some of the states have their own rules as well, although far less than Europe. But the point is, you still have credit card information and other PII. And if this system is processing all of that data and it's going through multiple systems, you need to understand what those systems are doing with that data, and your client needs to understand those risks as well. Then the failure modes. Now, there are tons of different ways that something can break, but there's a small little breakage, and then there's something catastrophic that can take down an entire production system. So you need to understand, with your scope boundaries and all of the other things that we look at, how bad a failure could be. And if you don't understand that when you're building something, then you don't know what's actually going to happen in production when this thing is running at scale. Then, as we discussed, you have the ownership. So who's going to be fixing and updating this thing? And hopefully it's you, because you chose the hybrid model and you want to come back for some recurring revenue. But then last but not least, you have visibility. And this is the most important thing you can do, because after you've built this amazing product for your customer, if no one's monitoring it, you're never going to know what has broken. I have an entire video on observability and how easy it is to set up. You can check that on the screen now. But it's super important to understand this. And again, this will make you a gold mine of money, because it finds other problems in the environment. And again, it just adds to you needing to be there for that retainer model. And then finally, on our 3 steps to selling your Agentic workflow, you need to ask yourself, cool, I've done all of these other things, but I still cannot read Python or JavaScript or whatever the hell my Agentic workflow is built in. So that creates a massive problem for me. And you can solve that problem by having a senior dev review whatever it is that you've built for protection. If we come into this thing, realistically, although there's a lot of tools here and I've got a few SOPs, the truth behind this is that something for like a lead gen system, I think I've got 5 LLMs, I've got about 7 Python scripts, and maybe 1 really long SOP. So if you equate that into the time it would take an AI native senior developer to review, it's really not that much time. So you could get someone in for like 3 to 5 days to come and review the 7 Python scripts and 4 other things that you put together. It's really not going to cost you a lot of money. If you look at hiring from South Africa, you could probably get a senior guy for like $550 to $650. If you go to Eastern Europe, a little bit cheaper. And if you go to India, you probably get it way cheaper. You would have to decide what you're okay with. But it's probably the best route that you can take to show the end client that you've built this thing properly, because you would have that stamp of approval. And really, you don't need to hire these people. They don't need to be working for you permanently. They just need to come from a trusted source. You can't just go online and say, I'm looking for a senior dev, and some random dude comes on who's probably just using AI to review the thing anyway. You want to get this kind of thing if you don't know them personally. Get a referral from a friend, get a referral from an established business, wherever these developers are, and get them to review your code for you. And you could probably get it done even faster by doing some of the work for them to some degrees. So you could stack multiple LLMs to review each other's code. You give them different hats to wear and you get them to test the security posture, the unsafe patterns, the reliability and things like that. You can use specific prompts. I'll leave 3 in the description below that you can use to kind of red hat your way through whatever agentic system that you're building. And this will put together a report for your senior dev to come in and just pick up and say, oh yeah, I see that, I see that, I see that. But then obviously you still want them to come and do that human review, because as good and amazing as all of this agentic stuff is, it's really not as good as the most technical people know it to be. So keep that in mind when you're doing this. You want to have the human for deployment readiness. And this brings me neatly onto the final part of this video, why N8N still matters. And it's actually a super important point to think about at the moment, because what we're doing with agentic is we are building something deterministic. We're taking this probabilistic machine and giving it guardrails, making it deterministic so it does the exact thing that we want it to do. Now, N8N already does that, so why would we use agentic? And that comes down to the whole speed thing that I mentioned earlier. We want to get the product to MVP as fast as possible. So why would we still want to use N8N in production then? And you got to think about it like this. With N8N, it has inspectable workflows that pretty much most people can understand because of that canvas approach, like I mentioned, which makes it easier for internal buy-in, because it's not this complete black box where they don't understand Python and all the complexities behind how this agentic system works. No, it's a canvas, and we can put together this very simple document that explains what that node does, what that one does, and I can train your team how to figure it out, even if they're not that technical. So you can see how it's a lot easier to kind of adopt that buy-in from there. And equally, changes are a lot easier to do from a production perspective without having to know how to do any deep coding and things like that. Because yes, again, agentic can do all of that, but then you have to get the developer in again to check on whatever the system just self-healed or self-created or made better by itself, because again, you don't know. Now, obviously, if you're a developer yourself, you're in a pretty amazing position because you can just swoop in and use this to build your own product faster than most of the vibe coders out there and really make a ton of money. So you got to think about that too. But if you're still building with N8N, and you obviously should be, you're not losing, you're not doing anything wrong. I think one of the best things you could focus on right now is using agentic to definitely build your own business and get things done as fast as possible so you can get your clients on board and do whatever it is that your business needs to run. But then also see if you can get agentic to build out the system that you need to build and reverse engineer it in N8N format so that you could then just copy and paste the JSON. Now, I've tried that a few times and it's never going to give you the perfect thing, but it can give you a pretty amazing shell. And sometimes it's even better than using N8N's internal voice to canvas thing. So play around with agentic and see how you can make it work better for whatever it is that you're trying to sell with N8N at the moment. But I don't think N8N is going anywhere anytime soon, especially for production, because of all the things that I've discussed in this video. And realistically, there's a ton of other things that go into something like this. You've got to think the larger your product gets, especially with an agentic build, you're going to need to start looking at AWS infrastructure, depending on the complexity of your client. Like, it can open up this whole new can of worms. Whereas N8N is a self-contained, whether they're self-hosting, it could just be on a simple VPS, something like that. But everything is already kind of done for you to some degree. The API integration is there for most of the systems. And something that someone mentioned to me the other day is, they said, why reinvent the wheel with this agentic workflow? And made me think about it. Like, reinventing the wheel was problematic when there was human effort. But if there's no human effort and the only degree of sacrifice I have to make as a human is to press Control and Shift on my keyboard to activate Whisperflow, to talk to it, to tell it exactly what I want, the agent does the effort for me. So there is no more reinventing the wheel in the traditional sense, because I no longer care about the wheel. This thing's going to build itself. But that still doesn't make it any better to use in production, as we've discussed in this entire video. So my view would always be to use the best tool for the job. I would not bother remaking something if I knew that I couldn't back it up with certified development and stuff like that, and actually building something that I myself trust. With N8N, you have a little bit more leeway in there, in the sense that you kind of offset some of your trust into the N8N developers, knowing that whatever they did will do the same thing each time, and it's actually verified and things like that. So it's more an outsource of trust from your half. You can either use the developer or you can use N8N itself to have that established trust for whatever it is that you're selling, and just hope that they maintain it and keep it up to date. But no system is perfect, guys. You need to think about these risks. And the whole point of this video was that you could understand some of the risks that you need to think about with Agentic, because it's not a magic bullet. It's not going to solve every problem for yourself. It certainly can, and will make your own workflows batshit crazy fast. And you definitely should be using it for yourself. But other than that, I hope this video was helpful. Leave any comments below, because this is such a fascinating thing to talk about. And there's so many different angles that we can take when we're trying to build things nowadays. So I'd love to discuss it with you. Otherwise, check out the videos on the screen right now. They're definitely going to help you on your journey. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.